Go.
So not everybody composes their own walkout song, you know.
Not bad, not bad.
Not bad. I like this. So what are we going to talk about?
Life and death.
That's nothing more significant than that.
Yeah, that's pretty much the ultimate decision that anybody would have to make. Life and death. So, where do you come down on life and death? What do you think about?
Well, so it's a broad issue. I think let's narrow it down and let's talk about death in the state.
Okay, death in the state.
And
Okay.
which basically to me means we're talking about the death penalty.
All right.
So the question is what do we do about, you know, the desire of people to kill people who have done or who are believed to have done things that are deeply wrong? And what's the right reaction to that? And is it yay team, you go? Is it hell no? Is it, in some cases, what's the right sort of response?
All right. So first of all, I'm Mike. That's Marc, and we're two sweaty guys.
Just back from the gym this morning.
Yep. So I start with, basically I say that any human being has the right to make a life and death decision. Okay? So because if a human being can't make a decision, then you're what? So as a fundamental thing, everybody has a right to make a life and death decision. So even if it's like Monty Python parody, Burn the Witch, everybody in that crowd has an opinion, and that may or may not approach justice, but they have a right.
See, it's funny because I look at it from a very opposite way, which is that we inevitably do make life and death decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Every time an engineer designs anything, right, they make a series of decisions about, well, but we can make it, but it's going to cost this much, and it's going to use these materials, and it means that these many people are going to die in mines, and those many people are going to... And so the question is, you're always making trade-offs.
Yes.
And the trade-offs are, I'm willing to kill a couple extra miners in return for saving a few lives of people driving around on roads.
Yeah, that's a calculation I don't think anybody can predict.
Well, but you can't, but you still do. You still make it.
Okay.
There's the classic Ford Pinto case.
All right.
Right, where Ford got the pantsuit off of them because we all remember the jokes about Pintos blowing up when they got hit from behind. And the reason they blew up is that there was a little metal shield over the gas tank that Ford decided not to put in.
Okay.
And it turns out that when they did discovery for the lawsuit, they found a memo from an engineer who did a very engineering thing. He said, okay, we can put these pieces of metal in every Pinto at a cost of $7 or $8,
Right.
which will cost us a total of $300 million over the life of the car.
Right.
Or we can assume that 5 people are going to die, and we're going to pay each of them $20 million, which is $100 million over the life of the car.
Yeah.
And they made the calculated decision to say, we're prepared to let some people die in order to make the car and make it more widely available.
But that is the logical decision that anybody goes through, and it passes muster. But hindsight is 20/20. You can't really ever say, I know.
Right, that Jane Doe is going to die.
Right, you don't. And everybody's not an actuary, but actuaries exist.
Right, but my point, I think the point I'm trying to make, and I'm not necessarily expressing well, is every decision we make is fraught in some very indirect way with death.
Yes.
And the tea I drink, right? The choice I make to drink a tea made in this ceramic mug, you know, whoever mined the ceramic wound up at risk of silicosis. You know, the people who made the tea were at risk of whatever disease people who harvest tea get.
Yeah.
You know, and so on up the chain of value.
Yeah, that amount of regress is, I think, ridiculous.
Well, but the issue is that for much of our lives, it's very indirect and it's very trivial. The issue in something like the death penalty is that there's no indirection, and it's not at all trivial.
Okay, I agree. So let's make a distinction between actuarial life and death decisions or insurance life and death
Right.
decisions and the actual death penalty, where a judge and a jury, or there is some system which comes up with the verdict,
Right.
death.
Yeah. So I'll tell a funny story, which is my roommate in grad school was Chinese American, and he's passed. He died from a blood disease, but we used to go out and eat all the time.
Did he speak Chinese?
Yeah, he spoke very fluent Chinese. In fact, it was hysterically funny because he had these conversations with his mom, were to be Mandarin, Mandarin, Mandarin tomorrow night. Mandarin, Mandarin, Mandarin. Come on, Mom. Mandarin, Mandarin, Mandarin. Oh, please, right?
That reminds me of a Far Side cartoon.
And it was one of these things where like I would be listening to him on calls with his family and just like chuckling heavily in the background. But we'd go out to all these interesting non-touristy Chinese restaurants in San Francisco, and a lot of them have the fish tank. Right, and he would walk up to the fish tank, and he had this sort of sparse beard because he imagined himself as Ho Chi Minh sometimes. And he'd sort of stroke his beard, and he'd look at the fish tank, and he'd go, "Kill that one for me." And I'd be going, "I'm having tofu tonight." But there's a direct decision, and we make that decision in a number of ways. And I think, foundationally, one of the points I make is that we inevitably cause death in our life through this actuarial bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? I choose to drive 15,000 miles a year.
Okay.
And in the course of driving 15,000 miles a year, there's a non-zero chance that I'm going to make a mistake and kill somebody. Right? Hopefully it's really close to zero.
Yeah.
And I work hard, hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Right? I think I'm going to make my whole driving career and it'll never happen. But if I absolutely wanted to be sure that I was never going to kill anyone, I wouldn't leave the house.
Exactly.
So we watched Dunkirk last night, which is, by the way, an awesome.
I liked it.
It is that good a movie,
liked
and it's just give him all your money and just buy a lifetime ticket to see whatever he's going to make.
Yeah, it's visual, very visual. You didn't have to listen to the dialogue. There wasn't that much dialogue.
Yeah,
the whole thing could have been like a French New Wave movie,
completely,
where you're just watching it. It might have been even more interesting if it were kind of a silent movie.
Yeah.
Because the music was a differently kind of staged music. There was just this drumming mechanic.
I liked it. I liked
it, but it was different.
It would have been interesting. But the point being, there's a scene in the movie, and I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler so you can put your fingers in your ear for a minute, where one of the characters on a boat gets sunk, swims to a lifeboat that's already full of people that was on its way to the boat that got sunk, and tries to get in, and they go, "No, you can't." Right. If we let you in, the boat's going to capsize, and all of us will die.
A turn of fate, because they were just begging to get on the
big
ship.
Yeah.
That was just sunk.
And that was part of the irony of it was the ship was leaving them behind, and they were pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But beyond that, there's this practical decision that you have to make, which is, I am going to sacrifice you to save them. And we make this decision, or people in those positions make these decisions all the time.
Well, men in war are different kinds of creatures, because they understand very well that they could die.
Their life is expendable, and that someone may make a decision. You will hold this bridge at all costs.
And that's just
and
what
that's
they
just
have to do.
That's what they have to do. But to me it's sort of a classic grounding point, which is we have the right to make decisions that explicitly cause death.
Yes.
Right, I believe that.
I believe
right?
it too.
I'm somebody who, if somebody were to attack me or attack my wife, and I had the means and opportunity, I'd kill them in that moment without thinking twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't lose a minute's, I don't believe I'd lose a minute's sleep over it.
Well, the interesting thing is, that is kind of a right that...
Right, that's the foundational right.
But it's being gradually taken away from you.
Well, no,
it's like, don't try to save your own life at home.
Right.
Right? So
call the fire department, don't put out your fire. But putting that aside, right, there's a foundational belief that I have, which is that human life is not sacrosanct. Right? I'm willing to spend human lives to accomplish certain goals. As classic example, we'll talk about healthcare for a minute, and then I'll pivot to the actual death penalty. Whatever healthcare system we put in place will cause deaths. it will also, in an offset, save lives.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a decision we have to make about which set of lives we want to save and which set of lives are we willing not to. Because the reality of it is that we're either going to let people die at one extreme because we have a National Health Service type, 2-year queue to get your elective, your stent put in,
Right.
and uncle dies of a heart attack while he's waiting.
Right.
Or we have a system where everybody who can write the check can get the stent tomorrow, but poor people can't afford it, and they die knowing that they can't buy the stent.
Well, isn't it interesting that I think what people are drawn to, the difference between revenge and justice, is the existence of a system.
Oh,
And whether or not the system provides justice, the fact that it exists and it's consistent,
yep.
is what I think people want.
Oh, have you been following what's going on in Mexico lately?
No, I haven't, but I believe this to be the case.
No. So what's gone on in Mexico is that in certain communities, they are basically capturing thieves and hanging them. And it's one of these things where somebody will be identified as, this is a guy who stole from my store. This is a guy who raped or attacked someone, and the community will get together and beat the guy to death or string him up. And it's a sign of the collapse. Now, I'm betting that a number of those decisions are wrong, right? That they don't get the right guy. They don't do
Correct.
the kind of process that we try and go through to reasonably ensure guilt. But this is what people do when they don't have faith in justice. And if you look back in history, right, what it was about was, you killed my brother, therefore I'm either going to kill you or your brother. And we are going to then balance the scales of justice, and I will forgive you.
Well, this brings definitely Steven Pinker to mind, because in his Better Angels books, he goes on to argue, I think improperly, that the world is getting less violent.
Yeah.
But he makes an important distinction between legal systems and honor systems.
Yep.
And an honor system is basically our human foundation. That's what we understand. We almost instinctively understand tribal rules, which is, you hurt my cousin, therefore we are your enemy.
Yep.
Your tribe will die.
We'll pay.
And the interesting thing is, as soon as you said that, the first thing that came to mind was a video that came out a few years ago with a bunch of women stoning a rapist in India.
Right, I remember that.
And I was like, you go. That was great. But the other thing is...
Let's stop for a minute, because I'm willing to bet that in the Western world, right, people watch that video and 60-70% of the people had that visceral, you go, and then they had the intellectual, hey, wait a minute, right?
Yeah.
And that the other people went directly to, hey, wait a minute, right? Didn't have the you go. But I think that there is something hardwired into us that that believes the scales have to be balanced.
Retribution.
It's retribution.
Retribution.
And
do you know the definition of nemesis?
yeah, exactly. I read a really interesting thing once about the death penalty, and I was trying to find it a while ago.
But let me finish the thought.
Okay, yeah.
Because this also goes to the girls and boys playing soccer, which is the guys will fight, and then they'll get up and shake hands, and the red card, that's it, and it's over.
Yeah.
The girls will fight, and then next season, it's like, this is what you did to my girlfriend last year.
Right.
Boom. And the retribution goes on and on. And I think about, getting a little bit off topic, the way that women handle conflict is very different than the way that men handle conflict. Because men are socialized into territorial sports, and sportsmanship is kind of a proxy for war, and then you can get a symbolic fight. Send us your champion, we'll send you our champion, and this is the jury by combat. And that'll be it.
And another sidebar, which is, I tend to agree that I think women have different conflict resolution styles than men. And that a lot of what it means to grow up as a boy is to learn to manage conflict in different ways. Right? Because, very few conflict with women end in physical violence.
Well, they can't win.
Well, but they don't. They usually don't.
That
But I don't know if that's the reason. I don't know enough to have an opinion about that. But they don't escalate to that point. Whereas with men, there's always a subtext of physical threat, and so the question really becomes one of we're accultured to learn to manage that threat away, by basically it's the classic, and I've lived this, right, which is you have a fight with somebody. You're in a bar, two guys, whatever, bump each other,
right,
throw a couple punches,
right,
and 4 hours later they're sitting at the bar laughing and drinking and trading drinks, right? Because man, that was a great fight. You're pretty stout there, guy.
All right, yeah.
And that's
but
kind of
that's also part of another social thing, which is you're going to be on my team next time.
Right, but it's also the reconciliation that's sort of wired into the male acculturation.
Yeah.
But let's take this back to death penalty for a minute. There are people who genuinely believe that taking any human life is wrong. I tend to think that those people are mostly full of it, right? And I think they're full of it for a couple reasons. One is that, and I laugh, they almost never take, like, if you're a Jain, right? You know what the Jain, right?
Yes.
They walk around with veils so they don't inhale bugs, because every life is sacred, and they're going to do everything in their power to minimize any taking of life that they bring into play.
Yes.
Most people who have this foundational all human life is sacred belief aren't Jain, and they don't really buy into the all human life are sacred.
Right.
What they buy into is the sort of Sartrean clean hands. Hey, I didn't cause him to die. So it's sort of like there's a civil war in a little country in Africa and hundreds of thousands of people are being killed, and I'm very upset about it, but we're not killing anyone. Right? So as long as we're not doing the killing, it's just a part of nature.
And why would we be the world's policemen? It's none of our business.
Well, yeah, pretty much exactly.
Interesting.
So, but you can have the belief that life isn't sacred. And you can have a belief that retribution is something that we want to try and minimize, right? Because we want to reincorporate people back in, right? If every time somebody insulted you in a bar, you had to kill them, right? Think about what's
a world this would be.
Yeah, exactly, right? You want to be able to come to reconciliation as easily as possible. You want a path to reconciliation. And so the question is, what's that path? For as long as there's been Western society, and I know criminal justice in Western society, I don't know it in other cultures, so I don't know whether it mirrors or whether we're unique. People who stole shit were hung, right? People who attacked other people, even non-fatally, were hung, or killed even more creatively.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for the pillory, which is something that we actually don't do, because as Louis C.K. or Bill Burr says, we're kind of a shameless society. We don't like shaming people, and it's like some parts of our society don't want us to show any shame. You shouldn't shame these people. You shouldn't.
Right. No. Right. They're not criminals. They're people who have run across the legal.
Right. But there is something to shame, and I think we like when we see it on the internet. The kid that says, "I cheated on my test."
Yeah.
And I have to hold this sign up in public.
Yeah.
Like a bum on the corner.
No, I'm a big believer that shame should come back.
And I like the idea of a public pillory.
But let's talk for a minute about it. So the article I was talking about before was about the death penalty. It made an interesting point. So let's believe for a minute that we captured Hitler.
Okay.
Right? He didn't kill himself. What do you do with him? He's never going to do it again. Right? I mean, assume there's essentially zero chance that he's ever going to run a country and start a war and commit genocide again. Right? So we're not at risk of recidivism. Right? What, is it appropriate to kill him? Was it appropriate to kill the Nazi leadership?
Yeah,
for their war crimes?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I'm not.
Because
why?
Because if there's war crimes, then the penalty for the ordinary soldier is death. I mean, you're sending 100,000, let's say 100,000 troops, which is just a small fraction of World War II. You're sending them to their deaths, potentially. And the leaders, you didn't say the word Hammurabi when you started talking about the architect.
Right.
But I know that you had that in the back of your mind, which is if you make a calculation, says that I think I can take over this territory, and I'm going to sacrifice 20,000 troops to do that, because that will give us the greater Germany, the greater Reich. You know, you are responsible for that big life or death decision. So it should come back to you.
But we don't kill but that's I think that's really wrong. I mean, we don't kill generals for fighting wars. Right? We didn't kill the Nazi. We didn't execute the Nazis for fighting the war. We executed the Nazis for genocide. We executed them for a variety of...
I'm saying war crimes.
War
crimes is a death penalty.
So, but my argument would be, we're kind of like, hey, look, if you kill the entire British Army at Dunkirk, our bad, right? That's war. You know, going out and killing all the civilians in villages in Poland,
no,
not really kosher.
Right.
And so, what I kind of want to do is I want to use that to sort of talk about the death penalty, which is in 1960, right, in LA, if, you know, somebody went and shot a guy in a liquor store to hold him up for $40, which was a not untypical crime, and they were caught, they were executed.
ADW was a death penalty.
Wasn't ADW, they shot and killed. Shot and killed.
Right.
And nobody thought much of it until Carol Chessman came along and started writing a bunch of books and having people write books about him, and humanized the people on death row. And the question comes up of, and it was very interesting that it was Chessman, because Chessman was white, and we'll get to the racial aspects of the death penalty in a minute. But the question that I'd sort of throw out is, let's take 3 crimes.
Yep.
Right? Let's take a generic 18-year-old kid, holds up liquor store, shoots poor guy behind counter, kills him.
Yep.
Right? For $150. Which is a crime that happens weekly probably here in LA.
Okay.
Let's take a, you know, husband kills wife, wife kills husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, you know, interfamiliar crime of passion.
Yep.
Right. And let's take something like Charles Manson, Helter Skelter, right? I go out and I commit a bunch of murders because I'm batshit fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Or evil.
Yeah. Death.
Right. So the question is, go back a while. All 3 of those would have been plausible death penalty cases in the 1950s or 1960. You might have gotten a pass on the interfamiliar thing if your wife or husband was having an affair, or if, you know, there was some extenuating thing. You know, there women who kill abusive husbands now kind of get a pass, right? So there's elements in that case where people might have gotten away with it, but for the most part, you know, they're going to send you to death row. And I'm kind of going to argue that what we're doing today is we're sifting, and I think what we ought to kind of do is, I tend to sort of go, well, you know, a John Gacy, yeah, I'm kind of okay with him dying. Right? Because part of what we're doing by executing someone is we're signaling. It's a public signal.
Absolutely.
And it's a public signal that says that here's a line, and if you step over the line, your life is forfeit.
That should be very clear. I think society should be very clear about that, with due process. Well, but I don't like the idea of having this massive population on death row that can accumulate brownie points by writing children's books, and somehow they have become a new person.
So Monster Cody isn't your friend?
No. And Tookie Williams was not my friend.
Yeah.
And so I think there, you know, I look at crime and punishment from the perspective of healing and curing. Okay? So if somebody comes in, breaks into your house, takes dog shit and sprays it all over your walls,
right,
and then just turns over all your stuff, rifles through it, and maybe just takes your wedding ring, you're violated.
Yeah.
All right. So at one point, you get to the insurance company, and they pay to replace everything.
Right.
Okay. So you're cured. The damage that was done has been undone.
But the violation's not undone.
But you're still feeling.
Right.
I don't feel comfortable in this house because I feel vulnerable.
Right.
Because that thing happened.
Yeah.
And then over time, maybe you go to counseling, maybe you go on vacation, maybe you do something, and then gradually you're healed. Okay? You're strong again, and you're back to where you were before. Now, if both of those things happen before the trial, and you're sitting in the courtroom, if you're not healed, you want that person to suffer because you suffered and you're still suffering.
Yeah.
But once you've healed, maybe you're willing to forgive that person.
Well, but I think the question really is.
But when there's death, the cure, I think, has to be death. The cure has to be life
for any death.
I think to the extent that we know the difference between manslaughter, murder 2, murder 1.
Right.
Yeah. So murder one
is murder and commission of a felony. So I and 3 of my buddies walk into the random liquor store, and the poor Persian guy behind the counter gives a shit instead of handing over the money, and we shoot him.
Right.
And so it's an interesting question, because there's a question that I've always had in my head about, would it make a difference? And the studies that I've read, and I don't trust studies a lot, because studies, and there actually was a wonderful article lately about how bullshit most psychology studies really are, and unreproducible. Basically talks about the idea that what deters people isn't the magnitude of the punishment, it's the certainty of punishment. Yes. Right? If I and the time horizon to punishment, because what winds up happening is people who are criminals tend to have very short time horizons. Right? They don't think a lot about what happens next year. You know, there's the classic joke about some bank robber who's like 80 or 90 years old in jail, averaged out kind of how much money he'd made robbing banks over what period of time,
right,
and realized that he basically made minimum wage over his life.
Like?
He could have worked at McDonald's. When you count in, you know, stretches inside. But I think that so you're a little more pro death penalty than I am.
I think people have the fundamental right, and I think how can you casually approach the idea, well, I'm going to do this, and somebody's probably going to die when I'm done, and I don't care, all right, because I want that thing that much,
right?
And I understand that there is a wide, let's say, a bell curve of something that's called the depravity standard.
Yeah.
Okay? We had an expression, is like, if my little sister gets raped, you're going under the jail.
Right.
Right? Because there are certain crimes that even in the jailhouse population, you don't survive very well.
Right.
So, you know, pedophiles
right.
don't do well.
That's the classic story.
And you can't build a system and sustain a system that gets too far away from that human emotion of getting retribution. So justice has to, simulate human retribution, and it has to be swift.
So there's an element of retribution,
and it has to be standardized. And
so the question becomes, we have kind of 2 problems, and then I want to talk about specific stuff in the death penalty. One problem is we want retribution because we think that will heal the aftermath of crime.
No, I think retribution is cure in the case of death.
Okay, but
you can't bring somebody back to life.
Right, but
replace a stolen car.
No, but at the same time, what we're talking about is the idea that, you know, if I have a retributive justice system,
yes,
right, then people who are the victims of crime, you know, feel that the justice system is on their side, that the system is taking care of them.
Yes.
Okay, that's one. The other problem we've got is, how do we not grow more criminals? How do we lower the level of criminality in society? And the question is, and this is a legit question, like I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
If I have a retributive justice system as opposed to a rehabilitative justice system, which one is going to have a bigger impact on crime? Now, the biggest thing that there's been on crime, and it's really interesting, is this whole lead in gasoline thing. I don't know if you've read any of this.
I know some of the
So there's a ton of studies that correlate, no causality, the banning of lead in gasoline with radical drops in crime rate.
I don't buy it.
Okay.
I don't buy it. I mean, it's kind of like saying, you have these gorillas in a cage, and if you feed them meat,
right? What you're saying is there's no agency.
Cheerios.
What you're saying is there's no agency.
Yeah, I'm saying this is it has to be taken with a grain of salt about people living in a modern society.
So the other one that's interesting is the Freakonomics one, which basically points out that about 14 years after abortion became widely prevalent, specifically within the poorer inner urban communities, right, crime dropped like a rock.
I've heard that as well.
And that people who didn't want to be moms, right, weren't moms.
So here's what I think, because I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, because as the famous blogger Den Best put it, there's the pussification of America.
No, I get it.
So we have low crime, but we have people who are highly agitated.
Right.
We have people who don't trust the system. They don't trust anything.
Well,
they think common sense doesn't matter anymore.
And
they think all this can be manipulated. And let me tell you the thing that I think that when you start involving the system and studies and complexities like that, and you get away from eye from an eye, then you kind of legitimize. Well, you say, all right, we're going to have a perfect no death penalty society, and if your child gets murdered, $1 million. All right. Anybody gets murdered in America, we guarantee you $1 million, but we won't kill the guy who did it.
And there are people who would take $1 million and go out and have the guy killed.
Exactly.
What you're talking about is, so there's a Willie Nelson song, "Beer for My Horses." I don't know if you've heard the song.
I don't know that one.
So the basic premise of the song is there's a bunch of bad people around, and every so often you got to go hang them. Mm-hmm. Right? You got to round your guys up. Get all the rope in Texas and go hang him from the tallest oak tree.
Or as Ben Grimm said, it's clobbering time.
Yeah, right, exactly. And, and then we get, when the gun smoke clears, we'll go back to the saloon and it's whiskey for my men, beer for my horses. Mm. That song resonates with people for a reason. Right? There's a concept of justice in that song that makes sense to people.
Right. But it also means the sheriff hasn't been on his job.
I know, but now let's turn the question around. Let's talk about America in 1960. Right? I was a tiny kid, so I'm talking from literature, not from memory.
I was a sparkle.
Right, exactly.
Sartre and hands clean.
Yeah, exactly. And the reality of it was that if you were black, the probability that you would be executed was dramatically higher than if you're white. If you were black, the odds that you would in essence be railroaded without a real process were vastly higher than if you were white. That if you look at the standard of justice that applied to the median black, right, arrestee and the median white arrestee, or the median white arrestee and the median brown arrestee, they weren't the same.
Right.
Explicitly weren't the same. I mean, it wasn't like a real subtle thing like it is today. It was sort of like, well, fuck him, he's a black gangster.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you can say there's one standard in New Hampshire and there's another standard in Alabama, and they're not equal.
Yeah.
But that is you can. I think you can draw a circle around those things, and. I'm not one of those people who take the significance of race as a very large variable without considering the rest.
No, I think...
Because in 1960 there were 20 million Negroes.
Right.
And they were all called Negroes. And most of them were poor.
Yep.
So anything you could say about 1960 Negroes, you could basically say about poor people.
Yeah.
Poor people who were out of the mainstream. And crazy shit happens to poor people who are out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
Especially in backwoods communities. You never know.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where you're talking about an honor society versus a rule of law
Right.
society.
No, and I think that
And the standard rule of law is what everybody wanted. That's what everybody wanted. We wanted equality.
that's right. You wanted justice. You wanted justice and retribution.
We want systems that work.
Yeah.
So that when the white murderer gets up there, they don't get away.
That's right. There's an interesting. There's two interesting things that come out of that.
He thar.
Right. The two things that come out of that were, I wrote a paper a billion years ago in grad school, got in immense trouble for it, in which I basically said that there's nothing in, black gang culture that would be alien to Achilles, right, or the Greeks at the time. Right. That there's nothing in that behavior that I can't map directly to what Homer describes, in terms of being an honor culture.
No doubt.
And but the other side of it that's sort of interesting is
so there's my one little tick for Monster Cody.
Right.
Who actually, by the way, he wrote me a very long letter.
Did he really?
I have a draft of his first book somewhere in my garage.
And what, he read your blog?
He read my blog, yeah. And at the time, somewhere around 90, 91,
yeah,
I was kind of heavily into that. This was started with City of Glass.
Yeah?
Davis.
Yeah.
And
he was full of shit, by the way.
Well, yeah, I think so. But he's the guy who coined South Central.
Right.
And so I used to hang out at the Aquarian Bookshop because the Lagans were friends of the family.
Yeah.
I knew them growing up. And all the old Watts poets.
Yep.
I used to hang out with those guys and listen to them. And there was a guy named Donald Bakir who wrote a book called Crips, which was not a very good book. But they were all up in arms about the woman who wrote Monster Cody.
Right.
And yeah, I hung around those guys a lot.
Interesting.
And I have firsthand experience with them. And I ended up siding with Stanley Crouch because he was an exile from that same group.
Right.
So that's an interesting story in and of itself. But gang culture, honor culture is close to our natural instincts. And you need some consistency to make that a justice system. But the justice system doesn't have to be as complex as it is now. And I think it has gotten so many complexities, and the law has become so complex.
Yeah, I agree.
That there's dodges and ways that you can get through that.
Yeah.
There's a great show that my wife watches about this lawyer in Australia, and he's sitting around the dinner table, saying, you get these scumbags off through technicalities all the time, and he says, there's something you don't understand about me. I care very much about the law, but I don't give a shit about justice.
Right.
And that was his excuse.
Yeah.
And when the law gets that far away from justice, what do people do? They revert to honor culture.
They revert to honor culture.
So when the institutions fail, when the law fails, when the systems fail, people fall back to their
So what you're saying is that we're at risk of Mexico-style vigilante justice at some point.
Absolutely. This is the redneck revolt.
Yeah.
This is the Tea Party. This is the election of Trump. This is people saying the New Yorkers and the Washingtonians, those two cities, they don't run the country.
We can't get away from that issue, can we?
Well, it's about
legitimate.
The public's faith in the system.
Well, that's legitimacy.
That are supposed to be
right. That's what I call legitimacy.
Representing our interests.
Why do you stop for red lights at 3 a.m? No, seriously.
They are so bad in New York.
I know.
I swear to God.
I know, but we're not going to talk about New York because New York's a whole different. Like I have to recalibrate my walking skills when I come back to California. But in seriousness, why do we stop for red lights at 3 a.m?
Yeah.
Right? We stop because we've internalized the value of stopping at a red light, not because we're worried about getting caught.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody around.
And it's a simple law.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to Culver City recently.
Yeah.
Okay, they have lights, they have walking lights, they have sounds,
Yeah.
they have someone speaking. It's okay to cross the street now.
Right.
That's getting a little bit more complicated.
Little robots that hold your hand.
And then there's bike lanes.
Yeah, I know.
And in India, they do it without lights.
I know. And in fact, there's argument that it's somewhat safer sometimes without all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to death penalty for a minute, because that's both. I think that's a meaty topic, and it's interesting. I think, why do people not like the death penalty? I think people don't like the death penalty because they feel personally accountable for the death. Right? They feel like, it is being done on their behalf, and they don't like that idea.
Yeah, I can see if you live in Manhattan Beach,
right,
where there's been 10 murders in the past 10 years, if
right,
that many.
Whereas if you
all these other people in Inglewood are getting killed, and I don't know, maybe we could give them a break. If they have a scholarship to this school, if we could send them to
his life, they're always promising students.
Yeah, if we could send them to Chaminade.
And there's an interesting thing in which I noticed that, I think back about the black people who I knew as a kid, and they were all about retributive justice, and they were all about he stepped over the line, fuck him.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not giving him a break. And I think that there's a certain, looking for the word, I don't know.
I think our society, unfortunately, has bred too many fancy people. Fancy, dainty people. And they think that the thin blue line is thick enough. And my favorite economist, Marc Blythe, says the Hamptons is a low-lying beach, and that is not a defensible position. So it's like if you get your society away from the basics, then your systems will get away from the basics. And
so do you think this is why so one of the things that sort of amazes me, and we're totally all over the fucking map here on this, I'm kind of floored by the widespread apocalyptic attachment that people have today.
Yeah.
And I have my crazy gun friends who are serious preppers.
Yeah.
Right, who are moving to redoubt states and who take this stuff, this is how I'm going to drive my life. Mm-hmm. And okay, actually most of the redoubt states they talk about are kind of Wyoming's a pretty cool place to live. I'd live in Wyoming in a minute.
I would too.
It'd be cold, but I dig it. And I have, but even in my kind of New York friends and my West LA friends, there's this sort of air of things are going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And to what extent do you think some of that gets driven by I don't think government is punishing people hard enough?
I think it kind of builds on itself. I mean, when you basically say, after the certain administration called out Wall Street, the Jamie Dimons of the world, and then they still got away with it.
Yeah.
They ended up getting bailed out.
Oh, yeah.
And the ordinary guy does not get bailed out.
Yep.
You kind of say, I got to be on the other side of the line. If you're in Silicon Valley, I have to build an app that so many people will buy.
Right. No, I've got to get across
instantly.
Right. I've got to get across that line, and if I can't get across that line, I'm fucked.
Right. And the interesting thing somebody mentioned is they end up turning software into real estate. That's where all the money goes.
Yeah.
And so there is a certain sense that you have to get a house and a castle and an alarm system,
right,
and all that stuff. And the whole zombie apocalypse thing is, we all kind of know that this is going on. We all feel that we're kind of powerless.
The fragility of things and the powerless.
Yeah, and we know that.
And you think that bringing back a stout death penalty would help steer that away?
I think that everybody kind of figures no matter what happens, Texas is still going to be Texas.
I can't think of who the comedian is. He's sort of a overweight white guy with reddish hair. He always appears with like a bourbon glass in his hand.
That's Tater.
Right, Tater. Exactly, exactly. And he had this great line where he says, "Yeah, the rest of you guys are banned in the death penalty in Texas. We're building a fast lane."
Exactly.
You know, and
Exactly.
you know, and it's there's probably this part of the great sort is that people who believe in that stuff move to Texas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. I think a lot of people. I mean, what David Brooks did as Patio Man.
Yeah.
And it was like that was an economic thing, which
Yeah.
is it's too expensive to live in Boston and New York and the Northeast,
Yeah.
and they're crumbling. They don't have the infrastructure. Come down to the sunny Southwest, and it's nice. And I moved from New York to Atlanta in '95.
Yeah.
And I was shocked and amazed at how cheap gas was.
Oh, everything,
movies,
yeah.
everything. And it was easy. Life was easy and slow.
Yeah.
And you missed the sophistication, and there were certain class of artists who wouldn't go through
Right.
Atlanta, and you know, the the Blue Man Group never went through Atlanta, and so you missed those delights.
It's me rolling my eyes.
But there's another way. You know, people in Georgia, people will start a deep conversation like, "My daddy told me."
Right.
And in New York, they'll say, "There's a study out of Yale."
Right.
All right, and you get closer to the human thing and away from the institutional thing, and we kind of all know that the humanities have gone to shit. And we kind of have said for 30, 40 years, if you send everybody to college, then we'll all be civilized.
Yeah.
And that hasn't worked out.
No.
So there's a certain amount of leadership that just doesn't scale. Everybody can't be a general. And we've kind of lived too long in that economic model where we think, you know, we can make America great again by, you know, getting everybody on that same middle class train. And I don't think it works. I think you have to turn it around the other way, which is, let's look at what actually happens in Mexico. And everybody in Mexico isn't running across the border to the United States.
Yeah.
They're living decent lives down there. And in fact, in Spain, they're living decent lives. And their GDP per capita is half that of the United States. So the question is, do you really need $50,000 a year to survive in the United States? And if that answer is yes, that's way out of whack for everything else.
Well, but you know, and you know, the story I tell, and we're totally freaking all over the orbit in our conversation. So my dad, first job, kind of, you know, after he married my mom and had to get like a real job, was he worked for a construction company, and they built houses in the Bay Area, and they built 900 square foot GI houses, 900 square foot, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, kitchen, dining room, you know, living dining room, carport, and they sold for like $7,000, $6,000 or $7,000. You couldn't build that house today, right? This is part of what the whole tiny house movement's about.
Right.
You know, the standard starter house. This house is about 2,100 square feet, 4 bedrooms, and this would be considered in most parts of America today
a mansion,
a generic starter house.
Oh yeah, it is.
Right, but practically speaking, even when we had all the kids here, we didn't need this big a house.
Yeah.
And we didn't need, we all have a ton of stuff.
Tell me about it.
I know. And we are in a culture that values, I've got a cool phone, and I've got, a nice teapot, and blah, 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 blah. And so we go out and we work, we make all this money, and we spend it on stuff.
Yeah. I think we can say that. I mean, again, what are we defending? And I think a lot of us understand that we're defending a lot of nonsense. Well, our lives are full of clutter. Here in the upper middle class.
So
on the coast.
Yeah, but again, I'm going to make a valiant effort to get back on topic.
No. That's what I'm saying though. We think we can be insulated from the element.
Right.
And the element is going to get sick and tired of us.
Yeah, but so there's a couple things about the whole element thing. I had presumed when I was looking at this back in the 60s, back in the 70s or in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and it was growing and scary and people were anxious about it,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of what this was about was just deep culture, right? There was a dysfunctional culture that had taken hold,
Mm-hmm.
and that was attractive and was growing. And then, basically, it died out, right? So cultures don't just die out.
No.
So the question is, what happened? Why did crime drop? What changed that made things different?
I don't know. I don't necessarily. I don't want to dismiss that, but I don't necessarily think that the expression of crime
Yeah.
is what it is. Let me just throw a theory that way.
Okay.
Elvis was dangerous in the 60s.
Yeah.
All right? He was just too far out there.
Couldn't show him on TV.
But now,
Oh yeah.
everybody can say everything all the time,
Right.
no matter what.
Lady Gaga shows up,
Right.
barely clothed,
Right.
talking about her sex life, and people think it's awesome.
Right. So we have, and I always think of, when I think of weed is legal in California, and who knows how many
So
other
we've
states.
defined deviancy down, as your phrase.
Yes, we have. So we've just said, hey, the criminal element is okay. Parents who, curse at their kids in the supermarket, we're not going to shame them anymore.
But that's not criminal, right? The
It's
issue.
not. But here's the thing: if there's anything to the argument that we used to be a repressive society,
Yeah.
that repression is gone.
So it's very funny that you talk about repressive society, because I think a lot about the whole Freudian thing, civilization, right, and the id. And again, watching Dunkirk last night, I was thinking about Mark Rylance, the civilian guy driving the boat,
Okay.
right? And he was the perfect civilized Englishman,
Yes, he was.
right? He's got his tie to the top. We are doing our duty,
Mm-hmm.
right? His son lies to comfort this other guy. He
Right.
gives him the appreciative nod.
Right.
We are going to do what we need to do,
Yes.
right? And that's the kind of Western civilization, archaic, kind of almost hero,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was the substance of what it meant to be Gary Cooper in High Noon.
Right. But we don't have those opportunities in our
But
society.
it's not just a matter of opportunities, it's we don't credit the style, right? What we talk about is how he's got to stick up his ass. What we talk about is how he's not really honest about who he is.
Right.
We don't talk about, the need to step up and do the right thing in whatever context you're in.
Yeah.
And and I guess one of the things I wonder, right, is can you have a world with no death penalty and still value that?
No.
Okay, why?
Because a world with death penalty is a world without courage. Okay? Because you don't face those guys. And I immediately think of George Carlin. George Carlin as a catalyst for saying the 7 words that you can't say on TV. And so now he's going to go talk about getting high and doing all these other things. The early George Carlin was very interesting, and I think he was good.
Yeah.
But the later George Carlin was this rich guy talking shit on stage,
Right.
and pissed off at everybody and everything.
Right.
So he's kind of the counterculture gone completely big.
Right.
And that he never had to fight for his life. He never had to be really courageous. He's on stage talking truth to power.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have any skin in the game. He's a comedian,
Right.
right? So he is not a courageous man. He doesn't have to face anything. He gets in a limousine,
Right.
he goes to wherever he lives in Malibu, and he comes out.
His office used to be my lawyer's office, and next to my lawyer's office in Brentwood.
So that has become the paradigm of the American cool, all right? Which is this kind of, let's just curse and
Everything sucks. Nothing is good enough.
Right.
Everything's miserable.
right,
And you contrast that to Gary Cooper and High Noon.
right, and there, he doesn't even want to take the opportunity to represent a positive thing in society.
So I'm going to throw my hands up at our original topic and talk for a minute. And I think this is going to be a mess. And I don't know.
All right, well,
how
let's close because we're coming in on an hour
Right.
for the death penalty. Okay, I say that a justice system should be simple and transparent, and it should do the curing at an eye for an eye level when it comes to murder one. Okay, you can finesse all the rest, but if we have like a 90% incarceration for those found guilty of murder one, dead within a year, that's good.
So it's an interesting question because intellectually, and I'm gaming this out in my head as I'm talking, intellectually I don't think I agree.
Okay.
And I think that I want to save it for extraordinary cases. Right? I mean, I'm talking about the Gacy's of the world. I'm talking
17,000 murders per year. That's what we do.
I know.
32,000 suicides per year.
A year. But what I'm gaming out is somebody kills my wife. Sent away for 20 to life at Folsom Prison.
Okay.
How am I sleeping every night? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
This shouldn't. That you shouldn't have to intellectualize that. That's what I'm saying.
Right. No, I mean, what I'm saying is that my gut is disagreeing with my head.
Right.
Right. And you know, we honor people who forgive. Right. We honor the family that forgives the killer of their kid. We do.
We do, but season 1, Game of Thrones. All right.
Yeah, but we don't want to live in that world.
But we love that world because it shows us what we can't do. We don't have honor among families.
Yeah.
And as dirty and crazy as those politics are, at least we know what a hero and courage is. And we and even the bastards.
You may get your wish. I mean, I think that you know there's a non-zero chance we wind up with a world where that makes sense. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not sure I think that's a good thing. You know.
Last word on the death penalty.
Last word on the death penalty is if I felt that there was a fair and equitable justice system, right, and that kind of everybody got the same breaks as OJ, I might be more supportive of it. But because I don't foundationally trust the justice system, which is itself the problem, this is the root of the problem.
Yes.
Right? I tend to say I'm going to limit how far I think they can go.
Yes.
And I think that what I'd sign up for today would be, the John Gacy's of the world, the Ted Bundy's of the world, right? Needle them. I don't give a damn. Right? You don't even have to needle them. Just, stand up and shoot them. I'm very disinterested in the humanity of exactly how we execute somebody. That's very much a clean hands kind of issue. Guy's dying, right?
Yeah. So you would go with hanging, firing squad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm relatively.
Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't really matter.
They're dead.
Yeah, pretty much.
How about hacking their head off?
A little uncomfy with that because that tends to be part of a whole public spectacle thing.
Yeah.
Right. What they do in Saudi today, or what they did in France during the terror.
All right.
But I don't know. I think this is one of those there's a couple of foundational questions that just divide us.
All right.
And not you and me, but us as a society and culture. And I genuinely believe this is one of them. And it'd be fun to map them out and decide which ones marked a territory.
All right. So this is one.
This is definitely one of them.
All right.
I'm going to argue that this is one, abortion's another.
Let's cue the outro.
Hang on, I got.
So now we have affirmative action in the archives.
Right.
And this is death penalty, which brings up a lot of other questions. All right.
His music, by the way.
607 on SoundCloud.